Why, hello there. I was just enjoying some Castlevania Legacy of Darkness on my Nintendo 64. You know, as one does in the year 2022. As only I do in the year 2022. Now this is in fact the second Castlevania game on N64, released back on December 8th, 1999. I had an N64 at that time, but I was also a dumb little kid at that time with a lame and limited taste in video games, so I didn't get to play it until now. If it's any clue as to how much I enjoyed this game, I've beaten it 5 times over the last 2 weeks or so. Let me explain why in my review of Castlevania Legacy of Darkness for Nintendo 64. I hope you have a spare controller pack handy with some space on it, because you'll need one to save at all in this game. I'll start my analysis by looking at the story, before I move on to gameplay, visuals, and audio, all the while avoiding spoilers for the game the best I can. The story of Legacy of Darkness, at least when you first play the game, follows the man-beast warrior Cornell, who's the only character you can play as until you beat the game with him. The time is the mid-19th century. Cornell is a man-wolf, not wolf-man, get it right, and went to hone his man-wolf powers with ascetic training and traveling for a year, only to find his village in flames and his sister Ada abducted by evil spirits when he gets back. Also, Dracula has been revived. But that happens every century in Castlevania. Cornell sets out to investigate and try to save his sister, with his story beginning on a ship in a foggy lake beside Dracula's castle. Now, Legacy of Darkness may force you to only play as Cornell at first, but 3 other characters are available to play as in this game after being unlocked, and each has a unique, or at least slightly different story. Each plays a specific role at a specific time in the chronology of this game's events, and the characters are unlocked in the chronological order that their tales occur. Cornell, Henry, and then Reinhard Schneider and Carrie Fernandez together. The tale of Henry happens after Cornell's adventure, and Carrie and Reinhard don't arrive at Castlevania until 8 years after Cornell's drawn through. Henry's campaign stands out as the only one that isn't a full, proper journey to defeat Dracula, instead functioning as an extended side quest to save 6 children who were kidnapped by Dracula's minions and oddly stashed in the vicinity of and inside Dracula's castle. The other 3 characters each have full-length campaigns through the castle, however, each meeting slightly different non-player characters and enemies along the way. Cutscenes, which aren't voice-acted but are nicely scored, narrate the story here with more detail than anything found in Super Castlevania IV or Symphony of the Night, but things are left mysterious enough to provide incentive to keep playing. The story premise may sound simple on the surface, but not everything is as it seems. To play through the game a single time with Cornell, Carrie, or Reinhardt took me around 10 hours. The ending of the game is unique for each character, and I was able to achieve 2 different endings with Carrie, who I played through as a second time on hard mode. I can say after seeing the full stories of each character that their convictions are given some more depth in the cutscenes, and their tales intertwined together to make the implications of each's individual story just a little more thought-provoking than each would be on its own otherwise. The exception may be Henry, whose entire story is only narrated by a couple text boxes at the start. The interesting interplay mainly exists because of Cornell, whose prequel story differs more than that of Reinhardt or Carrie since his journey happens years earlier. You won't have all the answers if you only play through the game as Cornell, and I had a lot of fun watching more answers unfold as I played through using the other characters. Character and story development aren't extremely deep here, but that's not really a Castlevania priority. Cutscenes were mostly unique, or at least slightly altered between Cornell, Carrie, and Reinhardt, and I felt satisfied with the conclusion of each's story. Impressively, gameplay between the characters varied in just as many ways as the story. Before diving fully into the gameplay, a little context is in order. Legacy is a refined, expanded, and altered version of Castlevania 64, not quite a sequel and released in the same year. Together these 2 games represent the first incarnation of Castlevania in 3D on the Nintendo 64, as they feature campaigns which are more similar than they are different. Now, I haven't played Castlevania 64, so I won't be able to comment firsthand on how this game differs from that cartridge. I chose to only play Legacy because I had researched how similar this game is to 64, but also discovered reports of it having improved camera mechanics and extra characters over its predecessor. I wanted to experience the fullest implementation of Castlevania in its first 3D release, and the gameplay of Legacy has not disappointed me. Route? Oh, what a specific sign. What a very helpful sign. I played Super Castlevania 4 and Symphony of the Night prior to this game, and I can say that Legacy of Darkness feels like a highly faithful 3D adaptation of the Super Castlevania 4 formula, with some notably expanded mechanics. This is a game about platforming through stages and avoiding deadly environmental hazards while occasionally having to fight skeletons, zombies, and a multitude of other monsters that get in the way. There's the occasional roast chicken or roast beef hidden in a torch for you to heal up with, and there's at least one boss waiting for you in most of the 10 or so stages that comprise the game, a few of which are entire levels unique to the campaigns of specific characters. You can find power-ups for your ranged attack, which is a whip for Reinhardt, a gun for Henry, chargeable magic for Carrie, and something unspecified for Cornell. But it works. Marbles, maybe? I'm not quite sure what he's throwing. The ranged attacks have 3 levels of power reached by picking up successive power-ups that increase their damage and change their visual presentation somewhat. The traditional Castlevania sub-weapons are represented with such attack items as the axe, knife, cross, and holy water. But unlike before, use of these items consumes collectible red jewels instead of hearts like in previous Castlevania games. They serve the same purpose, though. Another change is that the attack items can be powered up to improved forms by picking up duplicates of the same item already acquired. Each can be powered up twice to do more damage or even increase the area of attack in the case of the holy water. The visual effects of the power-ups I saw were really cool, and the attack items were overall a blast to use in addition to being incredibly useful on multiple occasions. Except for the knife, which always sucks. I recommend the axe and holy water, depending on the situation. In addition to the platforming and combat is the occasional puzzle to solve, which may range from finding a simple switch or key to open a door to more elaborate and creative obstacles I'd rather not spoil. There's a good variety to the puzzles, and some of them require attention to the game's day and night cycle, which runs constantly as you traverse from stage to stage in mostly linear fashion. You mostly can't return to previous stages, and there's not really any incentive to do so even when possible. You may have to go back and forth across a few stages a bit to solve their puzzles, but backtracking is not too bad overall. I appreciated and enjoyed the 3D action platforming, puzzle-solving antics of this game, as these elements were mixed up nicely and spread out in a way that kept the gameplay from ever feeling too stale or repetitive. Platforming is nicely broken up by the occasional enemy encounter, especially the boss fights, most of which are fantastic and a few of which are direct references to older Castlevania game bosses. Let me address the controls. The controls aren't perfect due to some awkwardness that may be due in part to the strange design of the 3-pronged N64 controller, but I still found them perfectly serviceable. Move with the analog stick, jump with the A button, and crouch or slide while moving with the Z. Each character has a unique ranged attack used with B, and a close range attack used with the left C button. Down C uses attack items, and right C is a multi-purpose action button used to do things like pick up items, examine various objects, and open doors. Holding up C allows you to enter a nice first-person view in which you can look around using the analog stick, while tapping it changes the camera between an action mode and a battle mode. I didn't really mess with battle mode much, but it's nice that the game provides this option. Sometimes the game will enter into an auto camera mode in specific spots that provided a generally helpful and expanded view of any area I was platforming in, but on a rare occasion the auto view was annoying and made the game harder. Luckily, in most of these cases, I was able to just tap up C to switch from auto view to action view, and that provided me more control over the camera than auto view. Pressing R centers the camera behind your character and targets enemies as well. Though not as ideal as the modern standard of a second analog stick to pan the camera, This is the main way I adjusted the camera as I played, because panning the camera in Legacy is done using left and right on the D-pad of all things. This makes moving and panning the camera at the same time impossible unless you have a third thumb, though it does work fine if you're just standing still to look around. Pressing up or down on the D-pad allows you to cycle through 3 levels of zoom on your character as well. The camera was a little sluggish to center behind my character, but overall I thought the camera functioned just fine for me for most of the time. The L button is just about as easy to reach in this game's default hand positions as the D-pad is, but luckily it only has a rare and occasional use for Cornell, and doesn't have any function for the other characters. If you press L as Cornell, it triggers him to unleash his man-wolf form and transform into a werewolf. This form looks cool and has improved offense and defense, but it drains the jewels used as fuel for attack items, and the transformation doesn't end until these jewels are completely drained, however long that lasts. I honestly rarely used this power, and think it would have been cooler and more useful if Cornell's moveset changed more when transformed. Instead, his attacks stayed the same. Damn it. But it's still pretty cool as a bonus power unique to Cornell. Who doesn't want to play as a werewolf? I found the platforming in Legacy to function quite well no matter who I played as. Jumping feels a little different with Carrie in particular, whose jumps cover more distance, but all characters can effectively navigate the diverse environments here. Momentum can be controlled mid-air, and the length of holding the jump button affects jump size. Sliding was a fun action to use for ducking under certain obstacles or hazards, and was made even more fun by being able to attack simultaneously while sliding. Super cool. I really liked the mechanic for holding on to ledges, which I haven't seen done in another game. Anytime your character's feet don't quite clear a platform, you can latch onto the ledge of it by continuing to hold A and then pull yourself onto the platform with the control stick. It was fun saving myself from deadly falls in this way, and the game doesn't require overly precise positioning to latch onto a ledge either. Anytime I fully missed a platform, felt like it was fully my own fault. There are some pretty fun and diverse traps waiting for you in Dracula's castle. I couldn't help but wonder if some of this game's dark and deadly environments went on to inspire the creators of Dark Souls. You'll find deadly falls of all varieties, into water, into poisoned water, into lava, into bottomless pits, into pits with defined bottoms your character splats against, and there are assorted fallway floors, spikes, blades, and other traps scattered around the castle. I felt that the level design was masterfully done and found myself platforming in all 3 spatial dimensions just about equally. Just about every stage features a little verticality somewhere. I particularly enjoyed the design of the clock tower at the end. Time to discuss the combat. Combat in Legacy of Darkness doesn't have any RPG elements like Symphony of the Night, but it does have its own nuance and strategic depth, partly due to playable character differences. On the surface, Carrie may seem like the weakest character, but by holding B, you can charge up her magic projectile, causing it to not only deal more damage, but home in on enemies. Just observe here how the magic flies around from ghost to ghost in this graveyard, seeking out new targets. The only drawback is that her magic can't be fired very fast and has a slight delay even when not charged. I actually didn't even discover Carrie's magic could be charged up at all like this until beating the game a second time on hard difficulty with her, as the instruction manual doesn't explain that her attack can be charged by holding B, and nothing in the game does either. This is a small criticism with clarity of controls or lack thereof. The only thing that gave me a clue I could do this was seeing a demo running from the title screen that made it look like Carrie's magic was a lot cooler than the wimpy little uncharged beams that I was using up until that point. The other ranged weapon I had loads of fun with was Reinhardt's whip. Reinhardt can't whip in 8 directions like Simon Belmont can in Super Castlevania 4, but he's still really fun to whip with. His whip powers up once to become a chain ending in a spiked ball, and a second time to gain a cool electrified look. And the whip is really powerful as well as being easy to lash with instantly and in quick succession. It feels like the most fluid and satisfying ranged attack of any character to me, though not as versatile as Carrie's magic. Close-range weapons include swords for Reinhardt and Henry, claws for Cornell, and dual chakrams of all things for Carrie. I found the basic close-range attacks effective for going berserk in any crowds of monsters I needed to thin out quickly, or doing damage to specific bosses anytime I was able to get close to them. Targeting enemies actually happens automatically most of the time when you have one in front of you and within a certain range. This generally worked fine for aiming my ranged attacks, though it isn't precise, and your aiming cursor can sometimes get caught on the projectiles of enemies, or unwanted targets in crowds, resulting in mild aiming frustration at times. I also found targeting to actually hinder me from throwing the holy water item in front of a re-engaging boss once, instead hitting the boss and bouncing off to scatter the flames where they were worthless. But overall, targeting was really not too bad in the game. Most of the time it worked just fine. With perhaps one or two exceptions, I had a lot of fun with the bosses in the game. Many were outstanding, with unique attack patterns to learn, and attack patterns that sometimes evolve in small ways throughout fights. I rarely encountered unique gimmicks for damaging or effectively engaging a boss, but when present, these were never anything too cryptic. I only felt one boss fight had a truly lame and tedious design, the others were quite strong. I should comment on the difficulty, because this game has 3 difficulty modes, easy, normal, and hard. You'll only be able to choose from normal and easy until you beat the game with Cornell and then Henry next. By beating the game with Henry, you can unlock Carrie and Reinhardt as playable characters, as well as alternate costumes for both of them and Cornell, and the game's hard mode. That's right, all of that just from Henry's playthrough. I made sure I played through each of the 4 character campaigns on normal, and then played through a 5th time with Carrie on hard. Normal difficulty wasn't too bad with any character, platforming was slightly challenging in a few areas, and I struggled with an occasional boss, but I found plenty of red jewels for attack item use and healing items such as roast chicken and roast beef, so it was quite manageable. While playing on normal, enemies weren't too threatening, but did get the best of me sometimes. If you die, you'll lose all your ranged attack and item power-ups, even those you had when last saving, because these upgrades aren't preserved when you save. If you save with a level 3 axe item, for example, it will be a level 1 axe item when you reload that save file, whether you die or turn your N64 off and play again some other time. Powering up these ranged attacks and items to their highest level is dependent on surviving long enough to find them, which makes it rare and exciting to finally get them there. Hard mode was quite a drastic and exciting change from normal mode. For one thing, red jewels, healing items, attack items, and power-ups are placed much more sparsely throughout the game on hard. I probably found around 10% as many healing items as I did on normal, and I almost never maxed out my jewels to 99, in contrast to normal mode play where I almost always was able to have an excess of jewels. Additionally, enemies deal more damage to you and you deal a little less to them. There was one boss in particular who was able to one-shot KO me on hard mode if a certain move connected, even if I had full HP. Also, even regular enemies are more aggressive on hard mode and will attack you with a persistence they don't show on normal, and enemy placements themselves are mixed up on hard mode. If all of this wasn't enough, certain platforming sections are made more difficult on hard, and I found myself struggling on this difficulty to get through some obstacles that weren't much trouble on normal. The challenge was fun and demanded more focus and engagement out of me. Paying close attention to enemy movements has more necessity and more reward when you stand to lose more by being hit by them. I'd highly recommend hard mode for those who love challenge. It was fun, fair, and refreshing as an alternative to normal. Hard mode even introduces a new boss in one specific area, which I won't spoil. Regardless of what difficulty is chosen, Legacy provides frequent save points scattered throughout stages, and this is something I can't praise it highly enough for. There are shop points where you can buy a short list of recovery items or cards that transform the time to day or night, but I mostly didn't use it, and even avoided shopping completely in my hard run for extra challenge and fun. While the hard mode itself was incredibly well done, I didn't enjoy how hard it was to unlock hard mode, along with the option to play as Carrie or Reinhardt through Henry's quest. Henry's campaign is a weakness of this game. The campaign is actually timed, requiring you to save the 6 children within 7 in-game days. 1 in-game hour seems to last around 1 minute, but Henry's quest is short enough to make this time limit a feasible one to work with. No, the issue I have is with the order you're evidently required to save the children in. Henry's quest is unique in that it isn't nearly as linear as the other character campaigns. In fact, you may find yourself discovering areas where the different children are hidden in a seemingly random order, due to how the areas are accessed by Henry. And even worse, if you haven't located certain children in specific locations first, certain children in other locations may not appear until those first children are found. The problem with this is that there isn't any clearly directed order of finding the children, and because this quest is basically a treasure hunt, players may not find them in earlier areas initially. I didn't, and was completely unable to find all 6 of them in my blind playthrough, only because one child in one area had to be found before a different child that would appear in a different area. You may or may not encounter the problem I did, but if you do while playing blind, there will be nothing in the game to point out what that sequence of finding the children is, or that it even matters. As it is, it would have been better for Henry's campaign to be scrapped entirely if you ask me, and for hard mode and Carrie and Reinhardt to be playable by default. I think it's an odd choice to hide the substantial full-length campaigns of these characters within the weird little mini-quest Henry embarks on. It was clear to me while playing that the areas Henry does travel to were tailored for the other characters, not him, as I noticed non-functional switches in one of Henry's stages that were functional in the same stage played as someone else. Every stage accessed as Henry is borrowed from another character's campaign, while each of the others have at least one unique stage all their own. Next, I'll discuss the visual presentation. Legacy of Darkness supports the Nintendo 64 expansion pack, and provides both a low-resolution and a high-resolution mode if you have that pack in place. This choice between the two modes is provided to you every time you power the console up. I played exclusively on low-resolution mode because I found the N64's attempt at high-resolution to be underwhelming and not that improved in picture. What I did notice more is that the frame rate suffered immensely in the high-resolution mode. The game stutters a lot more often and a lot worse in this mode. I recommend playing only in low-resolution mode as a result. All footage seen in this review was captured in low-resolution mode, except for this one clip I recorded just to experience and show how bad the frame rate stutters in high-resolution mode. The frame rate does slow down occasionally even in low-res mode, but not nearly as badly. It just slows down a little when there are a lot of enemies or enemy projectiles on the screen at once. Character and enemy models look a bit blocky, though some of that is expected in any N64 game. I actually think these characters look pretty good for the console, and their animations look fine enough. I did grow up with the N64 though, so it's possible I'm more forgiving of the console's unmistakable early 3D graphics. Some typical N64 limitations are in effect. Draw distance is low, lighting is dim, and the occasional object is rendered as a 2D image that simply rotates to always face the camera when moving to provide a cheap illusion of a 3D object. It's not too overdone, but anybody who plays a lot of N64 games will recognize this trick where it's used. I felt the environments and enemies generally looked detailed and good for an N64 game, and fit the dark gothic theme of Castlevania well. Environments have decent variety, starting with a few areas outside the castle and moving inside to the creepy parts of Dracula's castle later. The game pays tribute to classic Castlevania games, with skeletons, zombies, bats, and Medusa heads, as well as some bosses that will look familiar to fans of older Castlevania games. A few of the bosses are really fantastically rendered, and some are huge in size as well. There's some pretty incredible boss attack animations to see in places too. There's a bit of blood, earning the game's teen rating, and one boss's body will even deteriorate where you hit it as it's damaged. Very nice, grotesque touch. While lighting is generally dim, I did notice flames casting light on my character in one or two places. Destructible torches and candles are common and hide all sorts of different items in proper Castlevania style. I do have to comment on one thing this game has unleashed upon us all. Skeletons on motorcycles. An odd thing to encounter inside a castle in the mid-1800s. Out of place for the period. As out of place as lasers, which also appear in one stage. Apparently, Dracula has some engineers who are at least a century or so ahead of history. The inclusion of these more modern technologies does clash a bit with the rest of the setting, but if you can excuse them, the majority of the game holds a more cohesive mid-19th century feel. I at least found the skeletons riding motorcycles to be entertaining, and not too threatening or annoying. Moving on to the audio, sound effects were mostly good, but nothing too special. Your character makes a nice splat noise when falling from a great height, and I found the grunting noises some enemies make quite amusing. The sounds of basic attacks beating up enemies were satisfying, lots of smacks, but it's a little odd that every character's ranged attack sounds like a whip crack, even if they don't have Reinhardt's whip. Seems like they maybe didn't have enough sound samples, or enough space for them. Now, the music of this game grew on me more as I played through the game with different characters, because some characters visit exclusive areas where exclusive music plays. I therefore didn't get a chance to hear everything the soundtrack has to offer until playing with all the characters. In comparison to something like Symphony of the Night, the music accompanying this adventure tends to be a little more subtle, but in cinematic fashion, ramps up for specific dramatic moments, including in cutscenes and in boss fights. These moments are where the music shines most. Cutscenes and some of the boss fights have unique tracks composed for them, and they mostly do an excellent job of enhancing the atmosphere in these important moments. These songs are mostly gothic and orchestral sounding. However, between them are some more minimal and ambient soundscapes for a few stages that rely more on looped percussion and synthesizers, which give off a slight techno or electronic feel. A nice atmosphere is always maintained. One or two songs relied a little too much on looping short sequences of music, but the overall strength of the soundtrack offset this for me. This is a really memorable soundtrack overall, and I loved many of the tracks. If you've ever heard anybody say that Castlevania's foray into 3D was failed from the start, don't believe them. There's a good chance they didn't play this game, or if they did, they failed to commit the time necessary to give it a proper chance. It has its flaws, as I've outlined, but Legacy of Darkness is now one of my favorite N64 games ever. This game is packed with content, is mechanically every bit as competent as any other N64 game, and is an outstanding and accurate adaptation of Castlevania into three-dimensional gameplay. I'm quite shocked to discover just how good it is, because reviewers and Castlevania fans have not been kind to 3D Castlevania games. I do like Symphony of the Night more, but this is an overwhelmingly successful first attempt at 3D on a console as limited as the N64. The sheer amount of content to experience with the game characters and difficulty modes in this game is likely why you need a controller pack to save your game. The cartridge probably didn't have the space for anything else. Legacy of Darkness fits beautifully into the legacy of the Castlevania series, and it earns my immense respect and recommendation as a brave and well-made step into the world of 3D gaming that the N64's generation pioneered.